All right, very good afternoon, everyone. I feel very strange in this lecture-style sort of room. Not the best for a BALI sort of workshop, isn't it? It goes against every grain what BALI should be. But anyway, I'm just here to tell you a little bit about what we do in Health 1000. So you see from the agenda that actually I'm from the School of Human Movement Studies, or that's where I used to be. I'm now actually appointed at the Faculty of Health and Behavioral Science, and I'm the course coordinator for Health 1000, which is pretty much professions, people in healthcare, which is a common course for all first-year students in their second semester to take. So it's a fairly large course. So what I'm here to do is actually to tell you, not too much. You can see the title there. It says Health 1000 Tutor Training for Active and Blended Learning. In a vein that this is UQ to you and this is BALI. And Health 1000 has always been blended. So it's just telling you what are some of the systems or processes that we have done and implemented in Health 1000 to really ensure that our tutors are actually supported. So hopefully you'll be able to learn something. So I always put this up for all of my slides when I do a Health 1000 presentation. There's this famous African adage, isn't it? It takes a village to raise a child. In the terms of Health 1000, it actually takes a whole cast of thousands to actually bring it together. Because the course is, on such a large scale. So I just want to, I guess, acknowledge all of the different contributors ever since its inception in 2017 that were actually involved as part of the process. So the outline for today, very quickly, I will go through and tell you a little bit about Health 1000 in a nutshell, give you an overview, tell you what is it about Health 1000 that is actually blended, and then we'll talk about the process of establishing the Health 1000 team, which is the teaching team and the team of tutors. And then what are considerations for supporting my teaching team? And hopefully some practical things that I do that you might be able to apply in your own courses as well. So why have a Health 1000 course? Well, basically it is actually part of the faculty's IPE strategy. All right, we really want to ensure that all of our emerging students actually have an experience or the opportunity for interprofessional learning throughout their programs. And because of that, we also know it's part of accreditation requirements. A lot of professional programs and accredited programs actually do require and weave in collaborative practice and teamwork as part of one of their competencies in the health professions. And hence, it is really important that we have Health 1000. So in terms of the aim of the course, it is for students to be introduced to the foundations of an effective health practice. That's the first part of it. And then about universal healthcare and the Australian health system in which they will be actually working. So they need to know how to navigate through the Australian health system in an interprofessional setting. And part of the interprofessional competency framework, we acknowledge that students are on a learning journey in this learning continuum. And Health 1000 really sits at the foundational or introductory level of that IP competency framework. Because a lot of the students have not had that sort of placement opportunities or been out there in the health context yet. So it's very difficult to try and pitch a course that's too advanced for them. So that's where Health 1000 is actually sitting at, is actually at this part of the learning continuum. And then hopefully, as part of the IP strategy in the second and the third and in the capstone years, you'll find that students from the respective programs will have placement opportunities that will have incorporated into professional learning opportunities. This is information that's in the ECP, but it's stuff that I show to all of my students. So what I've done is just cut and paste plagiarized from my own slides actually. And it's about the learning objectives, to actually paint to you a picture of what we're trying to achieve as part of Health 1000. So pretty much it's about person-centered care. It's about understanding the range of roles, which is a competency in IPP, understanding how Australia's health system works, and have the awareness of the principles of universal healthcare, not only in Australia, but on a global scale in some of the countries. We've used different countries as part of the case studies as well. And then lastly, to be able to identify the key factors to communicate effectively, and obviously to work collaboratively in healthcare contexts. So the main modules is basically, split into two, and we use the terms modules quite differently across different courses, but the way that I've done it is, there are two main chunks of the course. First one is about the foundations of an effective health practice, and then the second half of the course is about the Australian health system. And those is pretty much the weekly content. All right, so all this is actually available online. If you just Google and search for, Health 1000 course profile, you'll see all this information. And this is the assessment strategy that we have we currently have actually for 2019. It's pretty much very similar to 2018, and our CCATs tell us that it has been really effective, and so we've actually retained a lot of the assessment strategies and some of the activities that we've had from last year as well. So you have the individual component, we have a reflection and a short answer, we have a group component, because obviously one of the things we want to ensure is that students can work collaboratively together. So there's no point having a course that talks about collaborative practice but doesn't actually put students in that uncomfortable situation of working with one another. So we've got group reports there, and then the last one, which is a short answer essay, and then we have weekly online components and in-class tutorial components to really engage students, and that's part of the whole blended and flipped pedagogical method that we've got for Health 1000 happening. So students are ecstatic when I show them this because they say, yay, no exams. You know, they're so happy about it, but I tell them that they have a group assessment, and then, you know, their grins become frowns, you know, all of a sudden. So where we were in 2017 and where we are at now, this is pretty much the slide trying to tell you that story. So in 2017, we started with 876, about 900 students. Still by far, it broke all of my previous records for coordinating large courses, because I think back then the largest course I've done was about 600. And so all of a sudden, you know, I'll be doing a course 900. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. But what was more challenging, I guess, was the fact that they're from 8 different programs across, you know, 6 different schools. And we have a team of 15 tutors, and we have 38 tutorial groups. So that was really hard for me to try and fathom. It was like, this is a lot of work. And I don't think it should just be one course coordinator. But anyway, that was what was given to me in 2017, and those were the challenges I had to deal with. And in 2018, we grew the course, because by then, according to the accreditation cycles, all of the courses now in HABS were ready to be on board. So then we had 1,366. Now, the minute when a student enrollment goes beyond 1,000, it doesn't make a difference. You know, what's 2,000? What's 3,000? At the end of the day, 14 programs, 25 tutors, and 61 classes happening every week. So in terms of the scale of the course, it was, again, you know, it broke all my previous records in 2017, and we had a new record. And again, 2019, I have to say, this year, our course grew again, but only marginally, so it's not too bad. We started with about 1,500 students at the start of the semester, and we are sitting at 1,456 at the moment, and that's basically the demographic profile of our students and where the programs that they actually enrolled from. So with that in mind, obviously one of the challenges is making sure that we have a really good teaching team. So how is Health 1000 actually blended? So I've alluded to some components of the course already that's blended, but the teaching and learning mode is simply the fact that we have online content. So apart from the first week where I give an introductory lecture that I repeat 3 times, all of the other content is actually delivered via online and is self-directed learning. And the other component is actually the the face-to-face tutorials. So students will have 10 face-to-face tutorials, 2-hour tutorials in the duration of the semester. And that happens with about 25 students per class. And each class will have a minimum mix of different programs, students from different programs. And this year we've actually achieved a minimum of at least 6 different programs in each class. And I think in one particular class we've managed 12 different programs. So that's truly multidisciplinary learning in that sense. And it's really interesting because it obviously, you know, creates many layers of learning to occur in that sense. And of course, when you talk about blended, I always put this, you know, smoothies, because I just think about a blender, you know, think about blended. So, you know, what exactly makes up, you know, blended learning? What are the ingredients, I guess you could say, in our course, isn't it, in Health 1000? So these are some of the things that I would consider, you know, the ingredients that go into a blended course such as Health 1000. Knowledge check questions, a tutorial week preparation activities. So part of the flipped pedagogical method obviously is contingent on students doing the preparation before they turn up for their tutorials. So we have to weave into our online content this tutorial preparation activities. If students don't actually do that, they'll rock up to a tutorial thinking it's just a traditional course and wait to receive, you know, information and knowledge. rather than to actually expand and to engage and to unpack and to actually, derive new meaning and actually synthesize new knowledge. E-portfolio activities is something that we included in 2018, and that has actually worked wonders to help promote engagement. And I've actually gave a presentation previously in the e-portfolio community of practice about how we've used that to try and increase engagement for blended courses. Kahoot quizzes, that happens in class as part of the review of the content. We actually do weekly Kahoot quizzes, so students love them. In our CCATs, if you don't know what a Kahoot quiz is, it's basically an online gaming platform. You can set questions, and it's time-based. You can set, all the different parameters for having a quiz in class that happens live, and students get the feedback immediately. And they get to compete either in teams or they compete with one another as an individual. So that's usually one highlight of the tutorial, and we use that as a basis of actually reviewing some of the content if there are some concepts that students don't quite really understand. That's Kahoot quizzes will help to identify that. And then we have Padlets. Because the course is so big, 1,500 students, and we know that Blackboard communication and Blackboard engagement on discussion boards are typically, very low uptake. So I've actually encouraged students to go to the individual tutorial groups, and that's where the online community is, rather than it's a Health 1000 Blackboard discussion board where you put a post and you hope your other 1,469 peers would reply, but they don't, because none of them actually look at it, apart from the course coordinator. So I'm the only other participant that goes in and actually answers the random post. So Padlet's basically used for all of the in-class activities. They used to put up assessments and put up information and notices, and I'll show you how we've incorporated it as part of our tutor support as well. The in-class activities are usually done it's all small group learning, so that's an important aspect of a blended course. You don't want to go in there and give a mini lecture. The tutorial is not meant to do that. Students are meant to get that information from the online content. And then we have learning summaries, right, to actually check their participation and attendance in that particular tutorial. And of course, it's guided by expert facilitation, and that's the tutors themselves, which I'll briefly talk about. So these are some photos from the classes that I've taken. You can see, it's all flat floor collaborative teaching space that we request, and it's conducive for small group learning. And we have multiple screens, and we ask students to actually bring their learning devices, because they use their learning devices to access the content, to review information, to do their research, to actually do the Kahoot quizzes, and so on. And of course, we also use some of the, prehistoric tools for learning as well, like butcher's paper and the whiteboard, and we use a lot of that as well, and post-it notes. And then what we'll do is we'll take photos of it and then just upload it on the Padlet itself. Right? So this is a screenshot of what an e-portfolio activity will look like. And e-portfolio activities are mainly very reflective in nature. It gets students to think about what is their understanding about the content. And one of the tenets of Health 1000 is we want to ensure that health or pre-professional, health students have this sort of notion of being a reflective practitioner. So this is really trying to get them into the habit, into the practice of doing reflective practice in terms of what they are learning. And this is basically the Padlet that I was referring to that students actually use. So it's very specific. We have a different variety of how we present Padlets, but typically we would have columns set out in weeks, and then we have a column for assessment, we have a column for notices, we have a column maybe like for contemporary health topics in the media at the moment, and that's usually quite helpful. And this is like a one-stop shop then the students go to, and it's actually more engaging than going to Blackboard to look for information. So they access Blackboard obviously for the online content, but in creating that online community, this is really what we try and achieve through the Padlet that we've got. And this is the Kahoots. These are screenshots and how the Kahoots will look like. And then on the students, when they go into a Kahoot game, this is what they're presented with. Or if they're using a device, this is how it will look like on their phone. And then they literally just, so it's like a response system, and it's a multiple choice. And the students love it. They really get into cahoots. Sometimes they get really competitive as well. Especially when they have really, sort of like gauge who is really good. And if you have a team, they're like, no, let's not have an individual. Let's, work on having the best team. And students just love that. And I don't know whether it's because there are incentives, because sometimes when you have classes from 5 to 7 in the evening, energy levels are terrible. So I will usually have a prize, and the prize usually includes sugar, chocolates in that sense. So students want that and they crave that. So they are very competitive. They get into, the coots really well. So what is the process of establishing a Health 1000 team? So a little bit about my tutors. I guess we actually have a formalized process, because unlike a lot of first-year courses at UQ, we don't actually utilize peer tutors at all. Our tutors are actually professionals, health professionals, clinical educators. Some of them are actually RHD students, but they have been in practice, and they're usually very, very diverse, because we think it's very important that students get the lived-in experience from somebody who has actually been out there and done that. There's no point telling and trying to teach about collaborative practice or what conflict resolution looks like in the health sector from a third-year student or a second-year student that hasn't been in a clinical setting before. I think it's extremely difficult to teach that. And so, for us, our recruitment of our teaching team is formalized. We actually have a recruitment drive over April and May. The job ads go out on Seek and UQ. We actually established a formal panel as well to do selection. And this year, we've actually got about 100 applicants. And so, I had to actually read through all of those. And the poor panel assessors as well, they're usually like, this year we got teaching and learning chairs from SHRS and the School of Pharmacy to actually be involved as well. So at the faculty, we try and be transparent about how we appoint our tutors as well. And the way that people appoint tutors in courses are very, very varied, from anything like, I've got 2 PhD students. Yeah, they can teach. Yeah, they can stand in the room and they can be there for that time. But can they teach? It's another thing. And so that's why I think it's important sometimes that we have some sort of criteria and eligibility for this, especially if we are actually blowing the trumpet about being an institution that prides itself on its teaching quality. So I think that's important. And then we appoint the tutors in June, and of course there's that task of making sure all that information going to CAP, which I'm sure some of you must have had negative experiences or positive experiences with it. But this is pretty much the team, all right? So this is pictures of 2017, 15 tutors, great diversity of tutors, health professions from dietitians, acupuncturists, to medical doctors, to social workers, to psychologists, to exercise physiologists. And because in 2017 we actually had an arrangement with the School of Pharmacy, we had Professor Nick Shaw as one of the tutors as well. So I was managing a team with Professor Nick Shaw, who is actually now the Associate Dean, in the School of Medicine, and I'm just like, oh, how is this going to be? But he was the most fabulous person to work with. And he did everything to the letter. I didn't have to worry about anything. He didn't pull ranks at all. And it was an absolute pleasure having someone with so much experience be on the team, And he played his role really well and did extremely well. And I know the students in his class gained especially a lot more because he had such a wealth of experience. We had PhD students, like I mentioned, some of them are PhD students, but some of these PhD students have actually been in practice. So they were actually practicing health professionals that have decided to come back to do the PhD. We had associate lecturers being on board as well. Like sometimes they're taking up additional teaching and it's worked well with them. They usually come aboard. So this is basically 2018. We grew the team from 15 tutors to 25 tutors. We had representation again from most schools, which is a good thing. All of them have got clinical experience, and we really try and role model IP, which is interprofessional practice, all right, and collaborating and working in teams amongst ourselves. And this is basically the team for 2019. And in 2019, what I've done is actually establish a new protocol in which you actually have lead tutors. Because one of the things I found with supporting my team of tutors was it's very, very challenging to have one coordinator trying to support 25 tutors. And again, like I said, it's quite different supporting health professionals who are teaching rather than supporting second or third year students who are teaching. I think it's a sort of a different dynamic there that happens, and the expectations are obviously quite different there. So I'm slowly evaluating and see how this protocol of having elite tutors and teams works, but it seems to be working really well, and all of the feedback that I'm getting is that the students appreciate, and they said they have never felt so supported ever in a course. So I've set the benchmark really high, for amongst other courses. So hopefully, people who are teaching in the other courses, they can gain from, some of the practices that we've got in our thing. So what are the considerations, for supporting your teaching team? So these are the things that we've implemented in Health 1000, and I guess this is the practical aspect of a workshop. Whenever I hear the word workshop, I would tend to think I'm going to have some tips and tricks up my sleeve, to take back. So hopefully I will be delivering some of that. I think first of all you got to ask the questions, right? Like, what are the considerations? What is it that is specific or important to your tutors, and what do they need to know about your course, about your students, the demographic of your students, about the learning mode, and about the philosophy of the course. So one of the things in Health 1000 that I found was a struggle was because Health 1000 is really like a social and behavioral science subject, and that's juxtaposed with a lot of the scientific, hard science-based subjects in first year. So students are taking anatomy, bio, they're taking chemistry, and then all of a sudden you have, something about Health 1000 is about, social science is about dealing with patients and people, and not only just symptoms and diseases. The focus is not very biomedical, it's very environmental and contextual. So the tutors need to understand that. And if they can understand that, then it's the same message that gets across in all of the course. How much teaching experience do they have in a similar context? All right, I think everyone can teach, but whether if everyone can teach well is another question. It's a very valid question to ask. And whether if everyone can teach well in a particular context is another step to ask. There are people that do extremely well with lecture-style traditional courses. And there are people who do really well with clinical placement and being preceptors and having 3 or 4 students and coaching them. So whether if they've had that sort of experience is important. Have they taught in a blended and active learning course? All right, again, that lends itself to its own requirements and it's got its own needs there. The level of digital literacy. With UQ2U, obviously there's all these new things that academics have to learn. New systems, new ways of creating items on Edge, new way of navigating and finding information. If we as academics are finding troubles and challenges, what more do you think the tutors would be feeling when they have to actually be using the same sort of tools? And some of the practical considerations as well, if we're appointing, people from external to become tutors, very basic things like, do they need a staff card? Most of the time, if the PhD student that you've got as a tutor, you don't even think about a staff card because, they got a student card, that's fine. So small little things like that, photocopying access. Oh, they're actually not an RHD student in the school, so they don't have a space. So when they come and teach, where are they going to be? Like things like that, practical considerations there. So key training moments, we have, an orientation and training meeting at the start of the semester. We have weekly preparation meetings, and we have moderation meetings. And we have an end of semester celebrations in which then I give all the tutors a survey to complete as well. Because then this gives me information about how well I'm actually supporting my tutors and what I need to do in the following year. So for tutor orientation and training, this is pretty much what it is. We start with a welcome, we do an icebreaker activity, and then we have the director of IPE come in, Associate Professor Neil, to actually address the tutors and actually tell them where Health 1000 sits, to get the big vision, the broad vision of where Health 1000 is. And then we go through like the course overview. I provide to them a tutor's handbook with all of the specific information that is relative and specific to Health 1000. Administration matters, we got Q&A, and this year we actually had the pleasure of having a student come in from last year that had taken Health 1000 to provide a student perspective of Health 1000. And I think that was really important because after that, the feedback I got was like, that's great. It was really nice to hear from a student that took the course last year. So we know how to frame and we know how to approach the course going into the class. So that was something new that we did this year, and I think it actually provided a lot of insight into what students, what tutors can do in preparation for their teaching. And then we had very specific support, I guess, related to teaching in UQ, the context of teaching in UQ, understanding all the different frameworks that we've got. All right, I think even some academics struggle to know that the health actually exists at the moment, but we made it really clear for our tutors, like, this is a great resource that you can use as part of your professional development and practice. And then we had, again, the technical training. So that's with the UQX platform training. So we had staff from the UQ2U team come and actually help to tell our tutors what they need to do to get into the content. And we had e-portfolio training as well, provided by Nathan.
4 minutes.
Okay, 4 minutes. All right, so weekly preparation meetings, we really engage every week. So we have a very high level of interaction with our team of tutors. And I think that's really, really important. And this year we've got the lead tutors actually involved as well to co-lead some of those meetings. And I think it's really helpful. So team building, it's a community, basically truly a community of practice, the teaching team that we form. We talk about best practices, overcoming challenges in a week. We clarify any information or challenges about assessments or admin. And then, we point, tutors to where the resources are. There's always the need to remind that. Some practical considerations, like I mentioned about the tutor resources. So these are like all of the tutor resources that I provide to my tutors when they start teaching. I know it's a lot, but it helps because there's nothing worse than not giving them enough information. And I'm sure some of you have had that experience of being thrown into a module without actually having enough information or resource to do your job well. So we make sure that we have all this information for them provided to them. And this is our Tutors Collective. Every year we have our Padlet, and I call it the Tutors Collective. And this is our online community for our teaching team. Tutors jump on here 24/7. Usually I'll see posts at funny times of the day, and people are responding and engaging with each other. They put up different texts, different references, different links. They're like, look, I found this on the website because it's really helpful, and I think this, expanded a particular concept. So that's great. So professional development, I point the tutors to all these other areas that they can, do continual professional development. The peer observation of teaching is a big one that I do in Health 1000. So all of the tutors will actually be observed by a lead tutor or myself, and I encourage them to actually go into another tutor. So it's not only for lead tutors or the course coordinator to carry out this thing, but every single tutor is encouraged to go in and observe someone else's teaching. All right, and that's very, very important. And we talk about all the other stuff. Some of the tutors are on the graduate teaching associate program, so they'll do that. And then, of course, part of that is the associate fellow of the HEA. So wrapping up, these are some of the highlights there. Community of practice, a tribe of Health 1000 tutors, and a lot of the tutors actually do repeat. They come back. We share good teaching practice. We laugh and we cry together. We say, I don't know how often you can say that, in a teaching context with the tutors, but I can certainly say that because it certainly feels that way. They go through all the pain with me, all the frustration, but we celebrate all the highs as well. And we really extend our network. A lot of them continue to be good friends now, even though they're no longer teaching. And some of them have moved on and found continuing positions elsewhere, so it's really good for them. And this other highlight is from the student video as well. But I do not have time, 2 minutes?
We're psychology students, and we only talk to psychology students.
Yeah, I will only study in the psychology building because it's better than every other building in this whole place.
True.
Well, you're wrong. Nutrition is the best, and it's what helps patients the most.
No, you're all wrong. Pharmacists are the best. Without medicines, we wouldn't be able to fix any problems.
Hello, everyone. I'm Norman. You are all wrong. Interprofessional collaboration is the key to the best person-centered care. Stop being like these people and work together. Look how happy everyone is working together. Yay.
Just some of the highlights that I get from...
Health 1000.
Yeah. And then I think this is the last slide. So these are, some of the things that are still work in progress. We're always trying to find better ways to improve, providing ongoing support and so on, making sure that we can actually measure some of the successes or some of the fails in Health 1000. And I think the social aspect, of your team, in a teaching team, and being collegial is really, really important. So we have social events as well. It's not only about work, but about play as well. All right, thank you very much.